hit record.
Oh,
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We are talking today about growth. The title of this live stream is Economy. And the focus today is on Cowlitz County's development, some of the organizations and efforts to help Cowlitz County grow well, and some of the mechanics that we can use to grow as a county. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Josh. How you doing, Josh?
doing well, Joe. Happy Sunday. How are you doing, friend?
I'm good. Weather's hot outside, which is a little bit of a change from I think what we've seen the last couple of weeks. I think like not like less than 2 weeks ago we had snow in the background, didn't we? Like
Yeah, I think it might be from last week. Who knows? We've been doing a lot of these, but yeah, it was coming down hard one of those times for sure. So now it
yeah.
looks like 70 and sunny out there.
Yeah, we have a spat of warm weather we're coming into before we go back into rain because we're still in spring. But yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah,
Um,
awesome. Well, yeah, no, I appreciate it, Joe, and I know you just kind of laid out a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. I'll let you reserve the right to dive deeper into that in the introduction if you want to. But
sure.
what I'm more important about or interested in rather is, why do you feel like this conversation is important for your community?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a bit about the building and planning department. We're going to talk about our ports, some of the extra governmental organizations that like regional collaborations and things like that, and then talk a little bit about kind of the economic future of the county. But I think the reason that this is important to my community, to the people who live here, is that our economic development, it directly affects the quality of life for everyone in our community. There are a lot of different factors involved in growth. And I think it's really important, and we'll dive into this as we get into some specifics, that we think about growth in context. We don't necessarily want to grow just for the sake of growth. And we need to be thinking about the challenges that are going to come as we grow and take advantage of opportunities. Um, I think this topic matters to me personally because I've seen cases of unwise growth, and I want people to know what that growth looks like and what mechanisms are in place to manage it so that they have a sense of why we might be growing in the ways that we are, or frankly, why we're not growing in ways that we could be. So, this is about the future for me. And I think it has a direct effect on all of us in those ways.
And just and tell me to I'm getting ahead of myself, right? But like when you say unwise growth, are you saying growth that isn't to the benefit of Cowlitz County, harming people? What do you mean when you say unwise growth? And maybe you'll have more
Sure.
examples if we continue today.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're talking about growth for growth's sake.
Yeah.
um, I think that it's very easy if you don't take a nuanced view into a topic like this to think, well, all growth is good.
Mm,
And frankly, I disagree. I think that there is a possibility of outgrowing your structure. And
mm,
I've seen examples in my own life, not to put any particular systems or things under the bus here, but I've seen examples in my own life of growing without really anticipating what it was going to look like when we got where we were headed,
yeah.
and the fallout of that is harm, right?
Mm,
Which fundamentally to me is against the values that I hold as a leader. I think that if we are going to grow, we need to do so wisely,
yep.
to try our best to mitigate the risk of harm to people within our community. That's the idea.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense, and I appreciate you going into that. I mean, not totally different on all levels, but very different on some levels too. Like my context around this obviously is business centered, and
Hmm.
I think that's the same thing. So like that's how I'm thinking about this in the beginning and correlating it. So that makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah,
Like. growth for growth's sake in the business sense is not always good if you don't have that infrastructure to support it. So I get what you're
Absolutely.
saying.
Yeah, and I think you and I have both seen examples of this. So let's take a short break here, and then we'll get into some of the practical stuff.
Sounds good. Works
Cool.
for me.
Trying to be okay. Shifting to the first set of topics, we're calling this one shaping growth and development. Josh, what do you want to know?
Yeah. Well, I know we have this broken down into three sections. So the first one kind of starting with building and planning department, right?
Hmm.
So I guess me being ignorant in some of this government talk, for lack of better words, talk to me a little bit about like what does the building and planning department do? What's their main role?
Sure. What do you know already? What's your impression if you hear a government department called building and planning?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first word that comes to mind is zoning, right?
Hmm.
Like I've dabbled in summer jobs in construction, mother-in-law's in real estate. So I know that there's a lot of zoning, right? Also, probably further than zoning, thinking about the development of the county, not overcrowding it potentially, or where we need more growth, where we need less growth. So I can continue to ramble, but those are my thoughts
Yeah.
about probably some of their responsibilities.
Yeah, I appreciate you pulling back to a background in construction. I think that's a huge component of building and planning.
Yeah.
I think the best way to think about a department like this one is they are like the architect for a
Mhm.
county, right?
Okay.
So an architect, building a building is the designer. They're the one who says how thick the board should be,
Yeah.
and make sure that the foundation has the appropriate, I'm getting out of my depth to use construction terms here, but that's the idea, right? So, building and planning's job is to make sure that our community development happens in a way that is safe, sustainable, and reflective of our values. It also accounts for all of the different facets of community development, including things like working with the Department of Ecology and the Department of Commerce, right? So essentially, they build comprehensive land use plans that determine where homes, businesses, and public amenities can be built. They are, among other things, enforcer of building codes, but their job is really to make sure that everything is well thought out.
Mm.
You might interact with the building and planning department in permitting. You want to go build a new building on your property, and the building and planning department would say, hey, here are the places where it's okay for you to build that don't have a negative impact on the environment. But the reason that they hold that particular responsibility is just because of the scope of the work that they're charged with, right? I think it's a really critical function for the county's development.
Yeah, and I would, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would argue that they probably have a pretty big impact on the development of the county, right? If they have say into what's being built and what's not. So
Mm-hmm.
how does that play a factor into the growth and the development and maybe outside companies growing or coming to Cowlitz County, if any?
Sure. Yeah. So, their influence is going to be mostly felt at the beginning of the development conversation. That's kind of my opinion on it, right? But I think that's where most people would interact with them. They do set zoning laws, they create building standards, or take building standards from other areas of government that have these requirements. They're shaping the look and feel of these areas, affecting that, and that has the downstream effect of property values, right? Traffic, even the shape of school districts and things like that can be influenced by those decisions. They're talking about where you can open a business, the type of housing that should be available, how much green space is preserved. That's kind of the other part of it, is the preservation, right? Balancing that with building. And their job is to make sure that while our county is growing, it's doing so in a way that accounts for the future, that accounts for all the impacts. One, I think, direct example of this is something like, digging a well. So there are a lot of areas in our county that are not hooked into a water supply. There's lots of areas, especially if you go out into the northwest half of Cowlitz County, that don't have running water. And so a lot of them do build wells. Well, if you drill a well in a place that is a preserved area, right? Like maybe the Department of Ecology or whichever department might flag those, says, hey, if you build a well here, you're going to have a negative downstream impact on the water at the other end of the groundwater that you're digging into. Well, building and planning is who gives you that information. They follow a standard, what they call the best available science. And I dug into that in my meetings with folks from building and planning. And what that essentially means is, based on the best information we have available, we're going to make the best decision in the interest of allowing this person to do what they want to do, while accounting for those, sometimes literal downstream effects, right? So that's I think the impact that they have. I think the experience folks might have engaging with building and planning is sometimes a little frustrating, because their job is really to tell you what the rules are, and nobody likes following rules that they didn't write themselves. But that is the reason why we have a department like this in place, is to kind of manage those decisions and help make sure that they're informed, right?
Yeah, no, and it makes a ton of sense. And I think like the last point I'll make is that balance between the growth and development of a county, but also the preservation and the environmental impact. And, I grew up and live currently in an area that's very similar, where probably more than half of the folks around here rely on well water. So I think that was a good example that struck home. But would you say that leads to some of that frustration around people who have to interact with them, that balance that building and development has to strike between, again, development and preservation?
Yeah, I think one of the, I try to ask people, what's frustrating about the work that you do? And one of the things I heard in talking with folks in building and planning is, we really don't like to tell people that they're not allowed to do something on their own property. Cowlitz County has historically held individual property rights at a very high regard. And, the main reason why you might say no is because there are downstream consequences to allowing something, to exist. So, preservation is a really important part of deciding what things can and can't happen. And that's the balance that they have to strike, right? I think here what we're really talking about is allowing people to do what they want to do, while also making sure that the effects of their decisions are managed and mitigated, right? Limited as best we can. Cowlitz County, I know you've looked at a lot of maps and stuff, but to give you kind of an idea of what we have here, a ton of trees, a ton of water. We've got, at least 3 rivers that run through this area. And I think it is so critical that we have people in positions in government whose exclusive job is just to think about the impact of those kinds of decisions. New construction is always challenging to an environment, because you're putting something there that wasn't there before it, right? That means change. But I think these folks really are here to try to manage that change as best we can. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's a great point to kind of to wrap up on this part. The next section that I wanted to move into here, Joe, is one that, funny enough, you just mentioned. I've looked at a lot of maps of Cowlitz County, and I understand how important, or can imagine how important, the river system is.
Yeah.
I didn't think about the port system. So why don't we move into that, and why don't you start again by talking to us a little bit about why your local ports are significant for the county?
Sure. So we've got three ports. We have one in Longview, one in Kalama, and one in Woodland. If you look at the shape of Cowlitz County, it's all on that western section that runs along the Columbia River. The port of Longview is as far as I understand, it's the first port coming in from the Pacific Ocean out west. And so if you're going to come in to the Pacific Northwest via the Columbia River, the port of Longview is the one that you hit first.
Oh.
These are more than just like places that boats land. They're hubs for trade, right? So these are drivers of our local economy. They enable businesses and communities inside of Cowlitz County to interact with all other parts of the globe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, trade, helping local businesses by way of making goods cheaper, by bringing things into the county. That's the impact of ports. It's not just about like supporting big companies and letting them move their boats through, but the fact that we have these at our use means that we can grow connected to other parts of the world. I think that's one of the things that makes Cowlitz County somewhat unique is that connection, because there are a lot of parts of Washington State that don't have any direct access and need to have things trucked in, for example. But we have these ports that help, engage directly through any water channel. I hope I'm not like belaboring the point too much there, but like I know that it's not like a really exciting woohoo, we've got boats that come in, but seriously, I mean it's really really impactful for us to have these available to us.
Yeah, and I don't think you're belaboring the point at all. I actually, dare I ask, I think I might want to take it one step deeper. Like, can you break it down a little bit more and talk about that impact
Sure.
that having a support system has on your economy, county, and also you're talking about like a little bit further than Cowlitz County, a lot further too. So
Absolutely, yeah. Well, so thinking about Cowlitz County, I think we'll get more into like supply chain and the impacts of an effective supply chain later on in this series of live streams. But they provide infrastructure for imports and exports, right?
Yeah.
That means that we can support a diverse range of industries.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we have these ports, and that means that we can cart goods in or push goods out, basically any business that could take advantage of the port infrastructure has that benefit, right? So this is a connector. It's a byway, almost like a channel, a passage, right? And so that means that by nature of having these ports, we can support industries that other parts of the state might not be able to. We have manufacturing. We can do logistics, maritime services. We have cruise lines that come up and down the Columbia River and connect at various points with Cowlitz County that way. Matter of fact, the city of Kalama or the port of Kalama just built a new. You drive along I-5 and you just see the words "public market" in like huge red neon letters.
Yeah.
It's this marketplace in Cowlitz County in the city of Kalama, directly next to the Port of Kalama building. And as far as I understand, that has had about 20,000 visitors coming from American cruise lines. So by nature of having this space, we have people who are coming in from other parts of the country or other parts of the world and engaging with the city of Kalama, right? Like that's nuts, especially for a city the size that Kalama is, to have that much traffic. It also helps to keep goods more affordable, right? So if it's cheaper by way of it being by boat to bring things into the county or to ship things out of the county, that brings prices down, or at least keeps them a little bit more level, so that businesses can afford to get new goods, right? We don't need to rely exclusively on trucks as the only mechanism for receiving goods. And in that way, there's also competition,
Yeah.
right? Like you can make all kinds of capitalist profit-based arguments for why that's a good thing, but that diversity of cargo shipping, I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself, and I feel like I'm getting really, really
Yeah.
like excited.
No.
And then on top of all that, there's tax revenue that comes
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah.
Something a lot of people might not know: the ports of Longview, Kalama, and Woodland operate
Mhm.
almost like independent entities. They are not underneath the jurisdiction of the county government. They're not underneath the jurisdiction of a city. They are their own businesses almost. They're still publicly owned, so they're still government, but each of them have their own commissioners. They have their own boards. They have their own set of directors, their own budget that comes from the state, maybe something that comes from the county, but they operate independently and are not under any kind of jurisdiction of the county or the cities that they're in. So they almost function like economic centers themselves, like
Yeah.
businesses themselves.
Of course.
Which means that they have a lot of flexibility, but also that they can be a good source of revenue for that community by nature of all that kind of commerce and trade moving through them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems, and not seems, it is with no doubt very important to Cowlitz County, I would
Mm-hmm.
imagine. So, what are, quickly before we move on to the next section, are there future plans for more port development or developing the ports that exist further in
Yeah,
Cowlitz County?
absolutely. I think they have plans to, growth is always going to be on the horizon, especially if your job is to generate revenue. But I think that they want to evolve, right? So like modernizing our docks, making sure that rail and road access is improved. We just the port of Kalama and the areas surrounding it just put in new parking, or is on track to put in new parking so that they can support more foot traffic to those areas. They're not just thinking about like profit, right? But thinking about the future. Matter of fact, I've got this Port Talk, the winter edition 2024, and the headline, redevelopment and revitalization. Among other things, this is talking about the old Continental Grain Terminal.
Okay.
I think improvements that we can make to this. But yeah, I mean, they are just thinking about the future. I said improvements to the grain terminal, but then I flipped directly to 2023 demolition. So change, right?
Yeah.
Change is an important aspect of developing and growing, and I think that's kind of what characterizes the attitude right now of those ports, from what I can tell, anyways.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, I appreciate that, Joe. Moving into the last section here, I wanted to touch on something, called the Growth Management Act.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously being all the way on the East Coast, I think that's something that I logically I could put together. But can you talk to me a little bit about what it is and how
Sure.
it's going to impact Cowlitz County potentially?
Sure. So the Growth Management Act has been around since 1990. It is, as far as I understand, unique to the state of Washington. And it is a requirement for fast growing counties and cities for an additional standard of planning. Basically, a county that has, let's see, I think I had these written down here. Maybe not. A county that has, it's like 17% population growth in a year, or greater than 100,000 residents and 10%. I'm throwing those numbers out, but that's roughly what I remember. Cowlitz County does not currently fall under the jurisdiction of the Growth Management Act. We haven't grown fast enough, but we're projected by 2050 to maybe cross into 150,000 people or so at the very high end of the growth projections required by the Growth Management Act. So it's possible we would become subject to it. Under the GMA, counties and cities designate urban growth areas, UGAs. And that's where most of the future growth would be directed. Inside UGAs, growth is encouraged and supported with urban services like sewer, water, transportation infrastructure. But outside of UGAs, growth is restricted.
Mm.
And so what this essentially does is it creates zones, cutoffs for development. That means that if you go outside of a UGA, the standard for you to be able to build things like new housing, for example, are incredibly limited. As I said, we are not currently under the jurisdiction of the GMA. And as we'll talk about in just a little bit, I'm not entirely certain that's a bad thing. Um, but what questions does that present for you, Josh?
No, it's just interesting. I mean, it presents a lot of questions. I'm curious about my own county that I live in. If we have a GMA and things like that.
Sure.
I really no. I mean, it's just an interesting idea. One of those more granular things
Yeah.
about state and local government that I really didn't know. So, I mean, I guess my initial question is like, you ended that statement with, you don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing that you aren't governed by that. Can
Yeah.
you talk to me a little bit about the impact that a GMA has on the county and why you feel that way, I guess?
Sure. Yeah. So the Growth Management Act requires us to develop comprehensive plans to address land use, transportation, housing, utilities, and other elements like that. Designating these UGAs, these urban growth boundaries, has the advantage, right, of preserving kind of the ecosystem outside of those cities. At the disadvantage of our ability to spread. It's
Yeah.
actually specifically designed to address the issue of what they call urban sprawl, right? Which is like, you develop a city, you draw the lines of that city, and then somebody moves to just outside that city or builds a home just out that way, and kind of spreads out further and further and further. It encourages higher population density, mixed use development, right? So more apartment buildings and things like that. The reason I say that it's not necessarily a bad thing that we aren't under the GMA right now, at least in my opinion, is that I don't know if we're at the point yet where it makes sense for us to draw those hard lines into those urban growth areas. You've like I said, like we've talked about a couple of times here, you've looked at maps of our area. There is a lot of undeveloped land in Cowlitz County, and I agree with folks that are concerned about preserving those areas. But there's a good reason why the standard for being under the Growth Management Act is what it is, because you want to wait at least somewhat until you're at a point where it makes sense to start drawing those restrictions. I'm just not quite sure we're there yet.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is additional development hurdles. It means that it's harder to build housing outside of these designated areas, and it drives population concentration in a way that, like I said, I'm just not entirely sure that it would benefit Cowlitz County at this point in our development to do that precisely. Again, it has all these advantages, right? So, requirements for regional coordination, requirements for planning, thinking about the future. And I think that in principle, those are good things. But with where Cowlitz County is at right now, I'm not certain that we want to find ourselves under those restrictions, especially not until we get some of the infrastructural components in place. People are already strapped for time. Things are already working somewhat inefficiently within our county government. And adding in additional requirements on top of that, to me, doesn't seem in the best interest for us in the short term.
Yeah.
I guess that's the case that I'm making. Although, like I've tried to say often, I am open to my mind being changed. Right. Just looking at this, I'm not convinced yet that it's the best thing for us to fall under those restrictions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up a great point in the last part there, the infrastructure, things already being slightly inefficient and people being strapped for time. That in of itself makes a ton of sense.
Well,
I mean, it also sounds. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
just to add on too, what that means, I mean, in practical terms, is that people are told no more often, right?
Yeah.
It means that if you want to develop a piece of property that you own, you might be told no because you're not in an urban growth area where you're allowed to grow, right?
Hmm.
Or, let's say that we do want more single family housing and we have areas of our county where that makes sense to develop. You might be told, no, you have to build apartment buildings. And again, I think those are good things, right? I'm not going to argue against apartment buildings. We need more affordable housing in this county.
Yeah.
But drawing those hard lines and then stacking those requirements on top, it
Mm.
means that some people are not going to get what they want. And I think it's important that we hold that in mind. Um, I think that sometimes people will make the argument that inviting these additional standards is a good thing, and
Mm.
I think it makes sense to me. I think the heart of it makes sense to me. But I'm just not sold on it being right for Cowlitz County at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. I think, and I want you to correct me, but if I'm hearing you correctly, right, I think that there is more growth, responsible growth, wise growth that can happen without those extra restrictions,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing them in potentially, or not even potentially, definitely could slow that down, right, and slow
Sure.
down the future development of Cowlitz County. If I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there have been a few different instances so far in our county's development where we would have, um, I guess, kind of tripped into, falling under the Growth Management Act and the requirements thereof. Um, I've been told by a few people within our county administration that if we were to fall under the Growth Management Act, at that point, there's no getting out of that program. And I think it's a useful framework. I think we could adopt pieces of that framework, and I think it might be wise for us to do so. But as soon as we invite those additional restrictions and requirements in, we can't undo that, right? You're not opted out of the Growth Management Act if your county shrinks. You just at that point, as soon as you sort of trip that wire,
Mm.
there's no going back from it, right? I think it's really important that we are accounting for those kinds of influences in our decisions and in our planning, because that has this sort of natural ripple effect, and I've talked about a few of those effects already.
Mm.
And again, I'm willing to have my mind changed on this being right for us at this time, but I'm just not convinced quite yet that we're at a place where it makes sense and where it benefits us to be under those guidelines and having to follow those additional requirements.
Yeah. No, definitely. I appreciate that, and I think it's a very fair and arguably, in my opinion, the right sentiment to have with my little knowledge about Cowlitz County. But I do say, right, like I was doing a little bit of side research just as we were having this conversation. I live in a county just under 1 million people, so very different kind of shape. But I'm surprised to learn about the amount of acts that Connecticut as a state has as well. So you've piqued my interest, Joe. So I'm going to continue to dig into that a little bit about my local government and where we sit in that.
Cool. Awesome. Let's take a short break and then we'll talk about some regional collaborations because I think I won't tee up the section. Let's just pause real quick and then we'll come back. Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, we are talking now about regional collaborations. Where do you want to start, Josh?
Yeah, well, let's start with the Cowlitz Economic Development Council, and as always, why don't you start by breaking it down for me? What is it? What does it do for your county?
Sure. So, the Economic Development Council, they're a nonprofit organization. This was established in 1979. Um, uh, this is essentially a collaboration between government and the private sector, businesses. They are working to attract new businesses, support existing ones, and create jobs.
Mm-hmm.
One of the primary functions of the EDC is business recruitment and retention. So they're actively reaching out to companies that might be a good fit for our county and trying to showcase the advantages of moving here. Kind of talking about like us as a strategic location, highlighting our transportation infrastructure. We've already talked about the ports, right? And then the skill of our workforce. They're working with existing businesses as well, helping them to deal with the challenges of running businesses, providing or at least pointing them in the direction of resources, and then helping to explore opportunities for growth and expansion. They've got at least five like functions, but there's a lot more that they do. I'll just kind of run through these.
Yeah.
Site selection assistance. So businesses that are trying to build a location in Cowlitz County, the EDC can help to guide them in the right direction with local knowledge about where things are probably going to be more successful or less.
Yeah.
Helping to support with financing, so connecting businesses with funding opportunities, federal financing programs, state and local ones, and private investment. Workforce development, so collaborating with schools, colleges, workforce agencies to ensure that businesses have access to skilled labor. Regulatory assistance, helping businesses navigate the permitting and the regulatory process. And that's depending on whether they're starting up, whether they're expanding, or they're relocating into this area.
Yeah.
And then marketing and promotion, right? So among other things, promoting Cowlitz County as a great place to do business. They
Yeah.
also play a key role in shaping the overall economic development strategy in our county. So they work with local governments, education institutions, and other groups to identify our strengths, the things that we could be doing better, and then to help develop policies that support long-term economic growth and the vitality of our economic system here in our community.
Yeah, those are pretty important factors.
So it's a long list of things, right? But I think it's really important to kind of pinpoint where they're at. As I said at the very beginning, this is a relationship between government and business here in Cowlitz County, trying to ensure that we are doing what we can to support business, and the business is doing what it can to support us, right? If you go look on the Economic Development Council's website, you can see a lot of information about who's on that board, but it's everything from I think like real estate agents to port commissioners, a lot of different kind of connection points all coming into one place. Specifically thinking about Cowlitz County and the business sector of Cowlitz.
Yeah. No, obviously that's really important, and that was going to be one of my questions too. Is like who sits on this board, who's part of the council, and I think obviously, as we all know, Captain Obvious statement potentially, but that diversity is really important. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I appreciate you shedding light on that. I mean, one thing that I want to double click into around this council is I think when you list out most of those five key pillars, right? Um, we can see how it helps this bullet point. But talk to me a little bit more about how the council affects local job
Sure.
opportunities. I think that's a big thing on a lot of people's minds around the country these days.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have new business, you have the potential for opportunity for individuals. Now, a lot of small businesses that are just starting up are not immediately creating jobs. So investments into small businesses are helping to support folks that you hope will grow into, sources of jobs for individuals. But if you think about, companies that are coming in that already maybe have some established presence and just need another place for them to grow, the Economic Development Council is trying to draw them into this community. When they come into this community, they bring with them the need for labor, right, for people. And so the Economic Development Council is thinking about the impact of those new sources of employment entering this community. One thing I'll point to on the port side of this, there's an ongoing conversation about internet access. A lot of our county does not have access to internet, and especially we are especially short on fiber optic internet. And so the ports are especially aware of this because they recognize that businesses don't want to come into an area where you don't have reliable internet access. The Port of Kalama, and I believe the Port of Woodland as well, have both taken on the task of helping to develop fiber optic cable. I think the Port of Kalama, in collaboration with the Kalama Telephone Company, has worked to map out new fiber optic lines out into more rural areas of our county. So they're just thinking about what businesses need, right, in order to be comfortable existing in this area and coming to this, and kind of anticipating those needs and then working on building the structures to help them when they get here. Kind of make it an attractive proposition to build a business here in Cowlitz County.
Yeah.
I talked too, just on the job part, about education. So helping to support, local workforce education, resources to help you level up your own personal skills, right? Because we're also thinking about businesses coming in who need skilled labor, and we want that to come from Cowlitz County. We want people within our community to be the source of those skills for those businesses. So it kind of helps in both directions, creating opportunities for business and also creating skilled work so that those businesses have what they need when they get here, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I know that you were touching on that with the education and workforce management as well. But I think it's very interesting to think about, what businesses need, and something as simple as, well, we take it for granted in today's world as internet, but being able to build that out and develop that. And it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning, right? The need for more infrastructure right now, right? It's not just incentives or benefits for business coming in. It's no, we need infrastructure to even support that before we get there. So I think that's eye-opening for me, and it's good details to touch on today.
For sure, yeah. Well, yeah, and it's not just about making things cheap, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think I've heard an argument that what we need to be doing is really reducing the barrier to entry, and I agree with that in principle, right? That we need to make it easy for businesses to come here and develop and grow and build locations in this area. That has to come with a recognition of the needs that we're going to need to fulfill, right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't necessarily think that the short-term decision to, reduce the upfront costs is in our best interest unless we're already certain that we have the structure to support what comes next, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked a lot about, like, my personal values, growing by supporting is one of them. And I genuinely believe that the way that we need to think about this is, how do we support what we have? How do we support the people? How do we support the businesses that we have? And in that way, plan for the future, right? Which I think is a really critical aspect of this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And then one more thing that I wanted to touch on here, Joe, is I think you talked a lot about, well, you didn't, but I can draw the connection between how the partnership between the Economic Development Council and the county government is important. But can you give me some details around how they partner together?
Sure.
And then let's stress that importance of why it's an important partnership at the same time.
Well, right now, one of the current county commissioners, Dennis Weber, is on the Economic Development Council. So the idea here is that, and this kind of comes back to my theory of government, right? Government is the structure for change. The county government plays a role in setting the overall policy framework, the regulatory environment for economic development. Like I talked about earlier, the Building and Planning Department is one part of that, and that's under the county government. land use planning, support services, infrastructure investments, tax policies, right? All of these things come out of a government that is thinking about economic development. The county also provides a lot of the public services and amenities that make it possible for businesses to exist and start up and grow in this area. And in addition, they're thinking about attracting new sources of business, like tourism, for example. On the other side of that relationship, the Economic Development Council brings on the ground expertise, right? So, business networks, people, and connections into the community. They targeted support services that help make economic development happen, right? So they're the ones that are out doing the actual work of economic development. And I think that's why this partnership is really important. There needs to be alignment between a county government and the people who are actually doing that work. We need to be talking to each other very consistently, because if the right hand makes a decision that the left hand doesn't like, well, they're going to have to deal with that, right? And this is part of, again, as I'm going back to, growing wisely. That if we're going to make decisions as a county government, we need to do that accounting for the impacts of those decisions. And the Economic Development Council is one of the ways that we account for the impact of those decisions. If we think something's going to have an impact on business, they're a good source to talk to help make sure that we're thinking of all the things that we should. So anyways, I think that's maybe straightforward, but this is a relationship. And on one side, we have the structure, and on the other side, we have the work being done, right? Yep. I just think it's really important that they're talking to each other and collaborating where we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing runs well without alignment and collaboration, right? And I think it's really important that is it common? This is just my own interest. Like I obviously don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's great. To your point, is it common for county commissioners to sit on boards like the Economic Development Council, things like that?
Yes, yeah, it is. It is pretty. Well, at least in this area, it's pretty typical. There are like 50 or so advisory boards or councils that different county commissioners are a part of. You can't necessarily afford to be part of all of them, but I do think that one of our commissioners' presence on the Economic Development Council is expected. Now, whether or not you actually show up to meetings, that's its own thing. But at least knowing that there is that connection, I think, is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, one of the next things that I wanted to move into is the Cowlitz County and the Wakiakum. Right?
Good
did
luck.
I hit that on the head, or did I butcher it?
This is the Cowlitz Council of Governments.
Okay. Okay, so I butchered it. Sorry for anybody listening to us live, but I just went for it. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about it.
Sure. So I'm just going to refer to them as the council, because that's a very long name to a long name. So
Star Wars.
So the Cowlitz Council of Governments is a regional planning organization that connects Cowlitz County and Wahkiakum County. Wahkiakum County is on the southwest corner of Cowlitz, and this is essentially a collaboration between two counties to think about the southwest region of Washington state. So this council was created voluntarily in 1961. It's a voluntary organization that was created in 1961. I don't know if there was a mandate for this to be created, but it includes all the cities in both of these counties, the counties themselves, the ports, and then other special districts that are included inside Cowlitz and Wahkiakum counties. The primary purpose of the council is to provide a forum for local governments to come together and address issues of regional significance. So this is a space to talk and discuss different aspects of managing a county, thinking about development, not just with us in mind, but with the impact on other areas around us. So a couple of stats I'll throw out about the council and about the area that we're talking about here. The Economic Development District, which this council kind of is over, spans 14,000 square miles in Southwest Washington. These two county regions contain 5 cities and 1 town, but many more unincorporated communities inside of this development district. Depending on how you count them, there are over 30 unincorporated communities in Cowlitz County, and a few more in Wahkiakum as well. But that means that there are just these pockets of groups, or sorry, pockets of people that need to be accounted for. It's not just the incorporated cities, but it's all the areas outside of those cities. Let's see. I'll just list off a couple here. Ariel, Cougar, Lexington, Rose Valley, Riderwood, and Toutle. Those are all in Cowlitz County. And then in Wahkiakum, we have Altoona, Brookfield, Dahlia, Deep River, Ellickman Valley, Grays River, Pillar Rock, Puget Island, Rossburg, and Skamakawa. I might have said some of those wrong, and somebody might have an opinion on which one of those counts. Just real quick, some of the reasons why this collaboration is really valuable too, right? We are different counties. We're made up of different demographic groups. So this is just some stuff that's like part of the review of the council itself. Both of these counties skew older. There is a state average of 21.8% of people over the age of 60. Cowlitz has 26.3%. Wahkiakum is 45.7%. So we have a lot more older people in both of these counties, but you can tell Wahkiakum has a huge population of people over the age of 60. We have let's see here, other statistics. A higher rate of disability among both of these counties. There is a state average of 12.7%, but Cowlitz has 19.2% people with disabilities. Wahkiakum 24.7%. So it's really important as we're thinking about growth that we're thinking about the impact on our neighbors, and that's where I think this council is really, really critical, because Cowlitz County is not its own thing with no impact on other people. As Cowlitz County grows, it's going to have a natural effect on people right next door, especially because we share a lot of infrastructure. We're all part of this same sort of general system. Wahkiakum also borders the Columbia River. And so, again, I think this is just about kind of making sure that we're accounting for each other in our decisions and helping to shore up one another's weaknesses potentially, right?
Yeah, I love that. Great example of a strong partnership and collaboration. So, really like learning about that. Humor me for 1 second before we move on to the next point here, Joe. Are unincorporated communities, are they unincorporated just strictly based off of population choice that those communities don't want to? Like, yeah, maybe
you're hitting on
here, but like, I'm just about it, and tell me that we'll get into it.
No. This is a good thing to talk about. Okay. You're hitting on something that has a flavor of contention to it. I was actually just reading some articles. So, for example, we have Longview, and directly west of Longview we have West Longview. We also have other unincorporated communities that just butt up right against incorporated cities. Yeah. It actually has, I think, been the general preference of people who are right next to those cities to stay unincorporated, to stay disconnected from city administration. The people of West Longview were given the opportunity to vote and voted against being annexed into the city of Longview. That's not to say that is always going to be the case, but there are absolutely cases so far in our county's history where people have chosen not to become connected in. You can make an argument for why, right? And I think in West Longview, this was part of the argument. We don't want that additional oversight. We don't want to invite additional restrictions by nature of being in an incorporated city. And, as you get further out east, too, it doesn't really make sense to try to connect areas like Silver Lake, like Toutle, like St. Helens into another nearby city. Toutle is one of the communities that I mentioned. It's out, if you go up I-5 and then go out towards Spirit Lake Highway. Yeah. And to give you a sense of the makeup of that area, I was going to go meet with somebody who lives out in Tootle, and I said, oh, let's go to like a coffee shop or somewhere out there. You pick. And he said, well, there's really no coffee shops out this way. There's Drew's. And the reason that's funny is because Drew's is like a convenience store. And that's pretty much the only business out that way. So anyways, yeah, they've stayed unincorporated, some by preference and some because logistically it just wouldn't really make sense to try to integrate them into a city or even to create their own city. I think that people in Cowlitz County seem to like the fact that they're not incorporated and therefore not under a lot of rules or administrative structures, right? So,
yeah. No, that makes total sense. Well, thank you for humoring me there. I didn't want to get far off, where we were at with the council. But coming back to that, Joe, I think it's good. Let's just recenter. And can you kind of double down on how does Cowlitz County having this council benefit you guys, right? You folk in the county.
Yeah, so the council, if we're specifically talking about like economic growth, the council has a lot in mind. They developed a comprehensive economic development strategy. I think you'd call that KEDS in August of 2023, and it's a huge planning endeavor. So they're identifying key economic clusters, target industries for our region, things like metal manufacturing, wood products, tourism. And then doing SWOT analysis, right? So I think SWOT is, what is it? Strength, weakness, opportunity, and what's the T stand for?
Threats.
What's that?
Threats.
Threats, yeah. So strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats in these various areas, right? Their job really is to give a structure for collaboration, for conversation. I think I used the word forum to describe them earlier, right? And it's a space to just think about, right? Hey, we are going to make these decisions. What are the potential impacts to those decisions? Can we continue, engaging in those conversations? For example, right, if a major employer is considering locating in Cowlitz County, they're going to be looking not just at our site, but at the overall regional business development. So they're going to want to know about transportation connections, how they're going to move their goods. They're going to want to know about the availability of skilled workers, the quality of life amenities for their employees. If we collaborate with our regional partners, we can present a more compelling case for those businesses to come into this area. And on top of all of that, they can help us leverage resources and funding for economic development projects that benefit Cowlitz County. Many federal and state economic development grants are targeted to regions rather than individual counties. So because we have these existing collaborative efforts, we can make a case that it doesn't just benefit Cowlitz County, but it benefits, the whole Southwest region, even out to like Grays Harbor, Pacific County, other areas like that. It just helps us make a strong case that Southwest Washington is a great place to invest into, a great place to come, a great place to live, right? It really helps us overall build a story of quality of life for people that want to come here or considering coming here. So,
yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, those are some pretty important issues that you guys are collaborating around and trying to figure out, and I think it all goes back to again, not growing for growth's sake, but having that important growth and having that collaboration to make sure that growth is good for Cowlitz County, but also good for your neighbors and your friends on the other side as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's I have a list of things that the Cowlitz-Wahkiakum Council of Governments has as its issues. So just to run through those. Business retention and expansion, workforce development, infrastructure planning, entrepreneurship and innovation, resiliency and recovery, thinking about things like disaster, economic disruption, downturn, quality of life, placemaking, I think is another term that's used, and then equity and inclusion, ensuring that the growth benefits everybody in the region. And Yeah, I know people have kind of hit on that word equity in the past. So just to kind of point into that for a moment, different people, different areas have different needs, need different things. And
Hmm.
equity is about providing what people need to help them all get up to the same level. The goal is equality, the mechanism is equity, right? And so the idea behind using that word, as far as I understand, is to ensure that everybody benefits and that everybody benefits equally, right? In ways that they need. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think we can take another short break unless you had any other questions here before we move into the last section.
No, no questions. I think you hit the nail on the head, and I want to be conscious of time at the same time.
Sure.
So I appreciate you as always, friend.
Okay. All right. We'll take a break and come back.
Perfect.
Okay. So we're back and we're going to talk for the last half hour here about the future and about engaging with our community in the context of economic development. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get into it, Josh.
Awesome. Yeah, Joe. So, I know the first point here is on the headquarters landfill, which to what we were just chatting about might seem like a little bit of a diversion from what we were talking about the rest of this
Sure.
live. So, before we even kind of understand what it is, I just want to give you a chance to tee it up and let your viewers know why we want to hit on this for a little bit today.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot more about this in the context of environment later on in this series. But the reason I wanted to bring up the headquarters landfill is because it's a really relevant topic to the county administration. And the headquarters landfill is one of the ways in which the county brings in its own money. As we're talking about economy, we're talking about growth. This is an area that I think it's a great example of the county government working to bring in revenue that
Mm.
hopefully lessens the load on individual taxpayers and on services that the county administration is trying to provide. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to just step into this for just a little bit. But it is just going to be in the context of the economic side of it. Again, we'll talk a lot more in the environment about this particular subject.
Okay, perfect. Well, keeping that in mind, knowing that we don't want to hit on it too much, can you just give me a couple bullet points on what it is? I mean, I know what a landfill is, but talk to
Sure.
me about it in the shape of Cowlitz County.
Yeah, so headquarters is an area of Cowlitz County. If you go up I-5, it's like on the other side of Castle Rock along I-5. So just kind of up in the northeastern section of Cowlitz. And it's an area that we use to dispose of garbage. Right now, they take in about 800,000 tons of garbage a year. They have a capacity for about 1 million tons. But it's essentially just the place where we put our regional waste. I was out there earlier this week and talked with folks from our public works department because the headquarters landfill is run by Cowlitz County Public Works. And we talked a lot about the economic potential, about the money that it brings in. And then I learned a lot about garbage, which is really cool. I made a couple of TikTok videos that I thought were just really interesting about different aspects of waste management. But yeah, that's the headquarters landfill in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I guess why should people in the county be interested in the landfill, a landfill?
Sure. Well, it's important to county residents for a couple of reasons. One, it just gives us a place to safely dispose of our waste and do so responsibly. Second, it generates revenue for the county. So the headquarters landfill brings in somewhere in the neighborhood of 23 to 25 million in revenue each year.
Wow.
And about 5.5 million of that goes into the county's general fund. It is one of the only things that Cowlitz County does that makes money. And in fact, I've been told that there is the potential for it to make even more money than it makes right now. Although, again, I don't know that that's necessarily the right call, depending on the opinion. But yeah, the reason that this has an impact on individuals is because it's what allows us to continue supporting the administrative services that the county provides without needing to get more money from the community. Now, I've heard kind of a counter to this. Some people believe it is a bad thing that the headquarters landfill goes into the general fund rather than going back into the pockets of city administration. I'm not going to make an argument for or against that at this point, but I just want to call out that the money aspect of this is a little bit contentious. There's disagreement on whether or not it should be going into the general fund, whether or not it should be coming back into the county or into the cities rather, because we all take advantage of those same services through waste control, a subsidiary of Waste Connections, as far as I understand. So anyways, that's like, I think, why it matters to folks, especially that revenue generation part, I think is really important as we're talking about economy.
Totally. And I mean, those were some strong numbers you threw out in the amount of revenue that it does bring in, right? And you can tell me that we'll discuss this down the road in future streams. Sure. But I guess high level for today's sake, like, what are your thoughts on balancing, that type of economic gains, but also with the environmental aspects of landfill? There's got to be some concerns there, right?
Yeah, I mean, so right now we have relationships with, let's see, Lewis County, Mason County, Pacific County, Wahkiakum, and Clatsop. Clatsop is in Oregon, across the way. So we take in all of their garbage in addition to Cowlitz County's garbage as well. And that has an economic advantage to us, right? Because we can, of course, charge some fee in order to do that disposal. The surplus of capacity I talked about earlier is one kind of topic of consideration. Right now, we take in about 200,000 tons less than we could in a given year. And I've been told that an additional 100,000 tons of garbage would mean about $1 million in profit for the county, or rather for the landfill, and by extension, because that surplus goes back into the county general fund for the county, right? I think that the balance we need to think about is like whether or not that's a good decision. Whether or not it makes sense for us to get up to our theoretical capacity for economic reasons. We had a company called Westrock that wanted to come into this area, or rather had a plant in this area, I believe. And we were able to, because we had that additional space, that additional capacity, we were able to take on their waste product and bring that into the headquarters landfill. If we had gotten all the way up to our theoretical limit, our capacity, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And it's possible, as I've been told, that the West Rock plant in this area would have closed in favor of another one that had space for them to put off their waste. So what we have to think about in the context of the economy for the headquarters landfill is whether or not we actually want to spend that resource, whether we want to take the short-term benefit of additional money at the expense of our ability to plan for the future, have kind of a backup, right? This is a really interesting topic when we get into the environmental stuff. I'll just make a general statement about that. I have the impression that the headquarters landfill is doing as much as they can to manage the environmental impacts of a massive pile of garbage. But I think we'll have to get into more of that when we get into the sustainability conversation later on.
I think that's fair. I
Cool.
appreciate your high level thoughts.
Ooh, one other thing. Just while we're on the subject, before we move off of it, there is also a conversation about whether or not the landfill should be privatized. I will say, just as a broad statement, I am generally against the idea that we should be selling this landfill to a private entity. I think that it is a good thing that it is in the hands of our public works department, because I have seen the harm that comes from things being twisted towards profit. Right now, the headquarters landfill is kind of a for-profit endeavor because it does bring in more money than it costs. But because it's owned and managed by a local government, it is not actively trying to find ways to, make the most of that money. Now, you can make an argument that it should still, and I think they do a good job of managing the costs of that work. But I generally don't believe that it's best for our community to privatize this particular thing. I think that it is good that it is a public service. So that's my last little thought on that, because I know that's come up before in conversations I've had with people.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, I will reserve my questions for when we revisit this topic down the road,
Sure.
because I know we only have about 15 minutes left, and we've been talking a lot about the economic growth of Cowlitz County, or potential growth, and we haven't really been able to touch on your vision, Joe.
Sure.
So, excuse me, my goodness. With that being said, what is your vision for the economic future of your county?
I have been practicing saying the thing I think up front and then giving my justification after. So I'll just start with where I think what I think we need to be thinking about. My ambition is to see us grow wisely. I think that's it. I think that I do want growth. I want the kind of growth that a lot of people are very excited about. But my maybe hesitation or pushback is going to be, is this the wisest way for us to develop ourselves? I've seen what it's like to grow poorly, right? I don't, like I said, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but like I've seen at least one city in Washington state that outgrew its infrastructure. And the problem with that is that you can't actually sustain that level of growth in the long term. This goes all the way down to like, do you have enough parking in downtown, right? All the way up to, do you have a good internet access? Are your water systems and waste systems capable of handling an incredible amount of growth in a short period of time?
Yeah.
I want something better than what I've seen for my community. And I want us to grow, but I want us to grow with a full accounting of what that means for us when we get there, right? I envision a future where we are growing in the right ways. I want to see a rise in diverse job opportunities, not just in traditional industries like timber and manufacturing, but also in growing industries like technology. There is advantage in diversity of that kind, because it means that if one particular sector fails, you do not, as a community, fail, right?
Yeah.
And we need to be thinking about how we can streamline processes, make it easier to access funding. We need to think about our roads, whether or not our roads can support traffic. All of that has to be oriented around the quality of life for our people. And so that's kind of coming back to it. My vision for this county is that we grow, but that we grow wisely. And that we do so with a full accounting of what it's going to look like when we get where we want to go.
Yeah. I love that. And I think something that we've talked about on previous streams, especially in the beginning, is, sometimes folks, especially younger folks these days, don't always feel like visions from the government benefit the average person or the average resident. So can you talk to me about why your vision and how you want to grow Cowlitz County is relevant to the average resident, why they should care?
Yeah. I want to avoid using buzzwords here, but sure. I think the benefit to this attitude for growth is that it is sustainable. That it lasts, right? The idea that, we just need to be creating more jobs, I think is good. But I think if those industries are short-lived, or if those businesses ultimately can't survive, then whatever growth we have is just in the short term. Small business owners need more support. They need fewer bureaucratic hurdles. It needs to be easier for them to succeed on their own without a lot of additional support, without a lot of additional employment. But improved infrastructure means that we have better roads, means that your commute is a little easier. Maybe you can justify to yourself getting a job in a space that you wouldn't consider before, because it's easier to get to and from the place that you're considering. Better schools for your kids, better maintained public spaces. If we are developing our economy in a way that's thinking about you as a tax contributor, as a constituent, if we're thinking about these public services, that means everything in your life gets better as a result. I think that's why this matters, right? I know that, when I'm talking about like a future-looking vision, it doesn't immediately connect to the thing that you want right now. But that's the idea, is that we're building the structure underneath that promise of growth, right? Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. It makes a ton of sense, right? And I think it also, not to twist your values, but it also comes back to community-led solutions at some point, and your want and your desire for your community to get more involved and give their input and value, right? I think you have a good sense of what's needed from an infrastructure perspective, but how do we prioritize that, right? So, if at all, how do you see that playing into your economic vision, and how do you see you kind of getting boots on the ground to understand where we need to prioritize growth and where we need to prioritize supporting more from an infrastructure perspective?
Well, we've talked already about a few different programs that are available, right? Like, I think getting involved with the Economic Development Council is a great space for business owners. Especially if you're thinking about the impact on small businesses and you are one of those, being able to speak to that group, I think, is really, really critical. At the individual level, choosing to shop at local businesses has that kind of benefit, right? Because it means that they have the means to survive. But I think that for me, the most critical aspect of managing growth well is ensuring that we are listening to everybody who has something to say. If you feel as though your government is not giving you what you need, say something. Seriously. I know that seems straightforward, but I think a lot of people feel like they can't have an impact at the local level because they're like, well, if I just go talk, nobody's going to listen. No, I promise you, people are trying to listen to you. You might be the only person who is brave enough to go into a room and say something in public, and your hands might be shaking the entire time, but it is really, really important that you are in those rooms. Because if you're not in those rooms, and there are people in those rooms who are not actively seeking out your perspective, you're going to get missed. Like, I know that is like, how do you get people to listen to you? Talk. Right? Like that's I think part of the thread that we keep coming back to in community engagement. Say something. Because if you
Yeah.
say something, it gives people the opportunity to respond. Now,
Hmm.
on the other side of that, I think as a county commissioner, one of the things I am aiming for is a more engaged community. I
Yeah.
think that we as a county administration need to do more proactive engagement. We need to push for the perspective of other people. And we need to do that in a way that is obvious and public and make it clear that that's what we're after, not just in these rooms, not just in these meetings, but out in the community, right? It's possible that there is already work being done by the county administration to pull people in, but that's not
Hmm.
the impression that people in our community have. So we need to think about ways that we can improve that perception, because that's what's going to give people the agency, the desire, the feeling that they can come and say something, right? I don't want to get too far on my soapbox there, but like this goes both ways. Yes,
Yeah.
individuals need to come and speak to the county and say, here's what we're looking for. But the county needs to also talk back and
Yeah.
say, we want to hear from you. Please come to this meeting. Please show up, because otherwise you might get missed. That's kind of where I get really like passionate, fired up,
Yeah.
is in that perception that we do actually want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's so critical, especially speaking from the younger generation, right? Like I'm 30 going on 31, and I think there is this want out there to for folks to contribute, right? Like your last point here is that contribution aspect that we were just touching on, but I think there's um you nailed it. You hit it on the head, right? That
yep.
perception that the state, local, you insert government level here doesn't want to hear you. But if they do, right, are they going to listen? And I think that's the other key thing. So when speaking metaphorically, when you're county commissioner, Joe, here, um, how do you plan on showing people that, hey, you show up, you contribute, I'm going to do my best to listen and take that input and enact change, right? Like that's a difficult thing to do, and there's a lot of contributions to balance and
Mm-hmm.
prioritize. So talk to me a little bit about how you think about that, especially in terms of development and growth, to kind of round out this live stream here.
Yeah, it's really important to maintain a posture of approachability.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you need to be really careful as a leader that you are not unintentionally pushing people away because you clearly have a singular focus. I think in my experience, especially in my professional experience, people are pretty hesitant to speak up unless they feel invited. And so I think the activity that I want to supplement, in addition to that posture of approachability, is to be out there saying, hi, I want to hear from you. I think that there are a lot of mechanisms by which you can speak to your county administration. But, I want to be careful about making promises here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am just very concerned about how we demonstrate that we are interested in hearing from people. Um, yeah, I think this is an attitude thing. And I think that attitude leads to actions, but we also have to keep in mind that, I don't know everything that there is to know about the way that the county has to communicate things. I don't know what they're responsible for right now. That has to be kind of an ongoing conversation before I say, here's what I'd like to do.
Yeah.
One idea that I have, and this is just an idea, so please don't hold me to this. I'm not making this as a promise, but one idea that I had was the county commissioners meetings. Right now, they are held on Tuesdays at 9 a.m. when almost no one is available to come and engage with those meetings. As far as I know, that is something that is in the purview of the commissioners to decide. I don't know that I'd necessarily make it an evening meeting, especially because across the county we have a lot of other meetings that are happening in the evenings during the week. But maybe we move that to a little bit later in the day. Or maybe we make it a little bit more obvious what's going on in those meetings, other than just posting a PDF on the county website. Those kinds of things, I think, are the natural outcropping of that attitude of approachability and that effort to show, yes, we are interested in what you think. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also want to highlight some local voices here. And so before we end out,
Yes.
I actually wanted to read a letter to the editor that came out on, it looks like March 10th, through our local newspaper. This is about the city of Longview. But I think it's important that we take these kinds of voices and highlight them and amplify them. So I'll just read this to you.
Yeah, I would love to.
The businesses in downtown Longview have had so many obstacles and challenges in the last few years. Those of us who survived the lockdowns have struggled to regain a strong footing. We want to embrace the new council leadership and are hoping to find a more business friendly and inviting climate for commerce to flourish. We cannot continue the same path. We can't continue with sidewalks and parking lots that are so unsafe employees fear walking to their cars. We can't continue to tolerate the filth and decay, human waste, and detritus that greet us in the mornings, and we can't be expected to appreciate being taxed when public services are so lacking. Parking is a continuing problem. I think traffic flows are going to become even worse with complete street projects. We truly need to encourage commercial tenants to locate downtown because a large portion of downtown occupancy is made up of nonprofit social service agencies. Those agencies don't build tax revenue. If our core downtown doesn't feel safe and clean, we can't attract high-value revenue-generating businesses. We are a great town with great potential and a history to be proud of. Let us continue to build and envision a prosperous and genuinely engaging downtown and create for the next generation a rich, viable future. That's Rick Still from Kelso. I think that's kind of the spirit we're talking about. And that's down to the local impact, right? That's City of Longview, so not exactly in the purview of Cowlitz County commissioners, but that's what we're talking about. That's the impact that we have. Is as we're thinking about building these structures, as we're thinking about the necessities, the needs that our community has, we're thinking about building a future for ourselves. Something that our kids are excited to be a part of and to be engaged with. So,
Well, that's so well said. Couldn't have thought of a better way to close out today, Joe. So
cool.
appreciate you as always and your great thoughts and your great perspective on how you can continue to make Cowlitz County a great place to live.
Thanks, Fran. All right.